deu certo. Só um minuto. Não foi, não. Agora tá, pode começar.
Good afternoon. We are starting today basically a repeat of yesterday's podcast with possible new developments when I'm working along with my associate Gustavo Melges in Brazil. We're trying to incorporate all the other added features. But in general, the title, what I put in here is the Pedagogy of Conscience, is one of the latest discovery that I have had. Latest, I meant in the last 4 to 5 years during the COVID time, when I have decided to put forth my early development called the 3C system, made since 1975, 76, in that period of time, and to incorporate what I have developed in the last 5 years. First of all, is the simple use of psychology for everybody, which is called the psychology of round and square. And I will be putting as many graphics in here as possible to give you a read and give myself a reminder how the metaphor, how all this metamorphosis from the psychology I've got involved in undergraduate since 1972, and then my 74, 75 master's degree, witnessing the transformation of the Freudian psychoanalysis to the overall the American humanist psychology and the educational psychology, and to my own area of the counseling psychology. And from that time, in 74, 75, and 76, I have thought about the creation in the area called the cross-cultural psychology, because my background in languages and also living experience by being born in China in 48 and between 52 to 62 in the area of the Portuguese colony in Macau. Linguistically, we're all speaking Portuguese, with acquired new languages of English, and from the Roman Catholic order. We were baptized Roman Catholics with the Salesian order from Turin, or Torino, Italy, and with the activities engaged in serving Mass, singing the Gregorian chant. These two languages created a much richer impact from the rest of my language skills, and also from the richer 6 years I spent from 1962 when we got to Brazil, and then to 67 coming to college here in the US and here in Wisconsin. What this transformation in part or in whole is my personal development involving with the cross-cultural psychology awareness, and in the use of my system 3Cs, which have become most effective, where I have developed this particular counseling skill, a form of methodology involving the first C is called the communication dynamics. And next to that is to analyzing all the communication dynamics in the use, what I call the communication analysis. And namely, I have used basically 3 of the figures: round representing complementary greetings between me and the client, and my client, and his interaction with his other life partners, family members, so on and so forth. The dynamics is basically the way we talk, the way we share. However, immediately after that, I also introduced to my students in the use of the Communication Analytica, which is an adaptation I have modified from the transactional analysis of Eric Burns, located at that time in Carmel, California, in that era. But the most important thing in the middle, when I described we are sharing the ambience, the cultural zone, which I call it the cultural sphere. Because directly or indirectly, in how I have evolved with my own handling, with the moving from different country with a different language intonation, from dialects in Shanghai to the dialects in Macau, which is Cantonese, which is also my mother's native tongue, and then from Cantonese, English, the learning of the Latin languages with the Latin of Latin and singing in Greek. I emphasize all this is about how dynamic life can be, because just to use a little bit of an idea, where our Chinese philosopher Confucius had always known for his 4 books, 四书五经, the 5 scriptures. But in actuality, there was a 6th scripture according to other comments. The 6th scripture from the Confucian scholarly work is all about music and sound. However, as we all know, 3,000 years lapses, we have lost the sound or the tone of these old masters were using. However, look at the interesting sound dynamic in the Roman Catholic with their singing in High Mass or the Gregorian chant. If we dare to look back into the time of Judea, the time of Christ, Jesus, even the name moving up to call Christ is in Greek. And this transfer is still a puzzle, be that they were speaking Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, with this cross-cultural zone moving into the Greco-Roman arena. What had prevailed after all these thousands of years, 2,000 years, at least 2,400, when Latin was sung with the Gregorian chant, which will still carry on at present. It's less used by the popular people because most of the church are going back to the local language. But in the singing of the Gregorian chant had enriched many of us, our engagement in the handling of learning and speaking Latin. So this is one of the dynamic things, I think, by me emphasizing in all this oval and round that you see are the multiples of the cultural sphere. In that time, in 75 to 76, 74 started, is all in the educational sphere, where in a college I was conducting my work and development of the 3C system. And 45 years later, but in between this, in this absence, since 1977, my wife, Kathy, and I have gone into a separate business. But even with this business, with the global engagement between Brazil, Latin America, South America, US, Europe, Asia, China, the language skill and the awareness, the multiculturalism had continued to grow in that business. And 45 years later, when we have decided to come back into the area academia, it sounds a little bit pretentious to talk about academics, but more so to use what we have learned in these 45 years, which have enriched the original idea of the 3C communication system, and just come to a very obvious, the development of the psychology of round and square. If I would say this in the linguistic group of the Latin, South America, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, I would call this Psicologia Popular. It's the popular psychology, meaning these in the use of the shapes of the psychology of round and square, along with the old communication dynamics. This is the form of psychology in the area of the cross-cultural sphere, and in the use of a counseling psychology. This has become a new era. Everybody can learn about this counseling psychology system, supported by the 3C communication system. And within the system, the main feature is basically using the two basic shapes. If you and I agree, then we will using a round to round. We shake hands as still an extension of a friendship, a greeting, meaning friendship. In our Latin American culture, even among the many Arabics, men do hug, we embrace. And with the women, we kiss the ladies in the cheeks. In my time and era of Brazil in the 60s, we also kissed, extending a third kiss to a young girl in the age group we call the debutante, or just about to become introduced as a young maiden to the society. Very much like in North America, we have witnessed the Hispanic, the Mexican quinceañeros. That means that they're coming to the 15th year is the maturity, and also starting to introduce the young lady into society. So these are part of the rituals, past and present. So the psychology of round square in Spanish, and in Portuguese, we can just call it psicologia popular or psicologia popular, likewise in Italian. But what's interesting, why I will speak of this passage of the 3C communication system and the psychology of round and square, what is leading ahead is, again, because the blessing of my years, with Brazil in the handling of the Portuguese and the fluency and the people and the group, that I totally fallen in love, because Brazil became my second home. Also, at my time as 16, 17, I was going to join the same religious order of the Salesians, which they were very well developed into the remote regions with much educational engagement. Of course, you can put in religious also, but more so I look at the education with all the many Brazilian tribal cultures like the Chavantes, and even up in the Amazon, up into Rondônia, in the major area is the Mato Grosso, the western state linking to Bolivia and into the Amazon basin. And with the Brazilian exposure, be that from my heartbeats, even changing to the bossa nova, one of my most preferred music, samba, the Brazilian school of music, the amount of songs, and in the 60s, in the era we call it tropicalism, the many songs, lyrics, and words expressing of a time in a very turbulent time with incoming of the military regime, 1964. In and between, a lot of a rich experience, and along with the many scholars that coming up into the horizon, where I have become very much alerted to the teaching of Paulo Freire, who wrote The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. But beyond that book, or the title, may sound a little bit, to some circle, may look at him as a very, more or less a radical thinker. But quite the contrary, Paulo Freire is the first person, after all this many years, thank you, I still have my linkage to the Chinese language. And if you look at this picture here with the monkey on the left corner, when we were youngsters in Macau, with the Cantonese-speaking mom, aunt, two aunts, two sisters, and many of the words the older women advising us is always tells a young man, you better have a 良性. In Cantonese, 良心. You translate that into have a kind heart. The first word 良 is kindness. 心 is heart. Then we'll talk about more about how the language of the Chinese is spoken, is a language in the use of our hearts. And in that same format, it houses also the idea of a human conscience. And this is part of the psychology of round and square, part of the 3C. And now I discover, by way of the psychology of round and square, it had awakened myself into procurement, into development of the psychological studies broadly, and mainly as I have just finished a book entitled The Pedagogy of Conscience. Now, this is a book where I have started in collaboration with the other development called the Open Book. Open Books with ChatGPT and more extensively with Claude, which I have put my logo of the ChatGPT, Claude, even Gemini, because this is the total collaboration in the development of this pedagogy of conscience, which is now numbering 80, close to 90,000 words. And if using the tall font, it's going to be anywhere around 300 to 350 pages, which are about to be edited with the insertion of pictures and put forth into the Amazon publication, and soon can be in 186 languages. Now, this is the area where I'm showing with this first picture with the images, and now extending with my title, The Pedagogy of Conscience. First, conscience. All of us have heard enough about conscience. Jimmy the Cricket, coming out from the Walt Disney production of the Italian novel of Pinocchio. He is the ambassador of conscience. We all know about conscience. If you Google conscience quotes, you will have thousands of quotations. And going all the way back, ancient times, much older times, be the Greeks, be the Chinese, or be the modern and contemporary thinkers. But conscience cannot be taught. Because of this procurement of this title, what had opened up to me, right now, I want to share much more now than other previous discovery. But conscience hit me first is by Paulo Freire's one word. I call it the one word Zen. In Portuguese, it's called conscientização. In English, it's conscientization. And yet, I never heard the verb of to conscientize being used in the English language. And let me explain this phenomena, how one word of the conscience by way of Paulo Freire's conscientization had taken me reflectively thinking and going all the way back to the 14th century, 1500, in China during the Ming Dynasty, of this one scholar, thinker, philosopher, and a great warrior also in Ming Dynasty by the name of Wang Yangming. And his teaching, his concept of his teaching is also called 心识. Xing is heart. Shi is learning. And basically, Wang Yang means 心识, which I have rebuilt it into the Western language, and I named it conscientology, or the study of conscience. What is very interesting, both Wang and Paulo Freire are basically speaking the same language. It's not to teach, it's not to coach, but to advocate, to push the idea, to become aware what is conscience, and this coincidence, and I'm still making my assumption that Paulo Freire was not very much engaged in any of the study of the Asian Orientals, such as in the field of psychology. I can highlight Erich Fromm, who wrote the book Psychoanalysis and Zen Buddhism, which is basically the very first exposure to an Asian ideology, concepts linking to the field of psychology. And this is just one. But what is important about in this search of the conscientological studies overall, I have decided to write the pedagogy of conscience. This had just happened about 10 days ago. And in the last 4 days, look at the speed. In this 90,000 words, close to 45% are my writings. The other 60% are being echoed, responded, and had me motivated to write more by this sequence of questions put forth by Claude. The reason I want to publish this book, it is entirety with the exchanges between me and this AI-aided Claude. It becomes almost a Socratic kind of dialogue. I'm saluting the entry of the digital era. I'm welcoming the input and the add-on to learning in the use of AI. It's like everything else. All new technology can put to good use, and same thing they can put into abuse. It's the whole idea. It's just about the whole concept of our conscience. It's not the knife is good or bad. If you use it to kill animal, to feed the village, as so happened during the time of the Mongol ruling China, the famous story of the mooncake. Only every 10 family allowed a butcher knife. And that's how the Mongolians controlled the Han Chinese. But even with this limited knives, at the end, in the using of the mooncake festival, by slipping in a message, a festival that Mongols never shared, it was marked the time and the day or the evening, the rebellion will start and have the Mongols overthrown, such a time that created the new dynasty of Ming. It's a little bit side story, but what it really indicated, with 10 families sharing a knife for killing animal, yes, feeding the villagers, even with all the picks and shovels and forks made in wood, the revolution took place, and the rebellion of the Ming Han Chinese had taken over the ruling of the Mongol. So it's not an issue. It's very much of a story of a conscience. Is the knife good or bad? It depends how you use it. Is the writing good or bad? Again, depending how you use it. What really coming into the essence of this particular talk is based on my cross-cultural travel and the cross-cultural spheres I have lived in, not just the urbanite Brazilians from the city of São Paulo, but in the outskirts and the small cities and the smaller communities, and to the rural area, and to the Amazon and the more remote region, going to Rondônia, meeting up of the tribal natives, the Cintas Largas, up in the reservation called Roosevelt, which was named after Teddy Roosevelt. In the province called Rondônia, which was Teddy Roosevelt, the American president, and his companion, traveling companion, Colonel Rondon, that his name was named after the province. I have traveled to São Gabriel de Cachoeira, 2008, in the northernmost Brazil, in the Rio Negro, the northernmost Brazilian, with the last city named São Gabriel de Cachoeira, where a Salesian priest had turned into bishop, ethnic Chinese, Bishop Song, who become known in the Brazilian history as the Obispo dos Índios, is the bishop of the Indians. We share quite a bit of our heritage, both born in Shanghai, both raised in Hong Kong and Macau, with the fluency in Cantonese we have spoken, and we also met up at the school where I finished my middle school, or the first year of the high school, in a town called Lorena, the school called Colégio São Joaquim. Next to it is the faculty, is the university, is the seminary school of John Bosco of the Salesians, where Song were going through his seminarian stage, as eventually he became the bishop in São Gabriel do Cachoeira, 70 kilometers south of the equator, where I met up 30 plus ethnic Brazilians, natives, like Tucanos, Pare, Baniva, and also the Yanomamis, which is located north of the Brazil in the area between Venezuela and Colombia, in the same region, and also another big ethnic group called Tucano. Again, just by the curiosity, when I know that there was a lingua geral, or the general language, was created among these 35 plus ethnic groups called Ninkatu. Yes, curiosity kills the cat. And talk about curiosity. Let's do not make the names and terminologies of philosopher and so on and so forth into a obscure title. Philos in Greek is just life. Sophists are the people that are curious. So if you are curious about life, and lover of knowledge, another way to put about sophist. So people, oh, he's sophisticated. Well, if you're a sophist, you like life. Philosophy is the person who loves lives and always curious to learn. So anybody can be philosopher. And sometimes in a very, very minute issue had taken me miles, thousands of miles away to the region, be that in Africa, in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Angola, Brazil, China, to the mountains in Altai, meeting by the border, the Kazakhstan, Russian, Mongolian border, and all the other Chinese ethnic groups, again, involving procurement and development of the mining of the stone called aquamarine. So I'm intermingling in this last 45 years from our business along with the cross-cultural experiences, formulating my study now, and this study of the psychology of round and square will be a perfect tool that will complement the work of Paulo Freire's conscientization, and also to give a better explanation in functional terms of Wang Yangming's 性学 or conscientology. And with all this combination, it pushed me to have finalized the first book. I look at this as the first book in the use of the name Pedagogy of Conscience. And let me tell you how interesting, with all this development from psychology to counseling psychologists to 3C's communication to the psychology of round and square to now into the procurement to know more about conscience. Here comes a very solid point that I hope my audience can share. I have made a discovery. Let me repeat, never me alone. Many hundreds, millions of people had crossed the very same passage that I am crossing now. What I really want to convey to my audience today is a very important cultural dissonance. Cultural dissonance is the gap, is the cultural disconnect between us people as in groups, and also in a certain extent is a part of a collective cultural ignorance in this cultural sphere. When you have not the words to discover the other groups and with their thinking and idea linking to conscience. Now, let me put it very point blank. First, I draw a historical time zone with the year 1492. I'm a historical buff. I'm a Spanish major. I'm very much into the history as development of the cultural sphere and zones. 1492 is started with the Spanish Inquisition. In actuality, there was a warning about the ethnic Arabics and Jewish Spaniards to be converted to the Roman Catholic Church 100 years ago. But by this time in 1492, in that time frame, also Spain had retaken Granada. And also in that same year that Columbus had found enough financing to travel west, as he had found the islands in and around Cuba. By the first island he found was Hispaniola. Today, Hispaniola is hosting two countries, Dominican Republic on the east and Haiti on the west. And also that is the same year when the Iberian, the most sophisticated navigation of the Portuguese, and just putting a little bit of a, what you would call it, fofoca, a little gossip. Columbus was never Italian. Part of the procurement or investigation I'm conducting is where Columbus is born in a town in the region called Alentejo. And the town he was born in is named Cuba. That's right, just like Cuba in that we know today. And in and around Cuba, Columbus also have named all the other islands after the many name of the saints. Likewise, that also happened in his hometown, Cuba, in the region Alentejo. He is a bastard child between the noble in control of that area, Beja, B-E-J-A, and his Jewish mistress, when I say Jewish, they're already converted. We call them conversos. By the family, last name is Zarco. Columbus' grandfather Zarco also is one of the explorers who have found the island of Madeira. All this navigation at the southernmost tip of Portugal, Sagres, was where the school of the Prince Henry and his school. And with all these navigators that found the rest of the world, let me name a few names. 2 years after Columbus, Vasco da Gama had traveled passing the Cape of Good Hope of South Africa and getting himself in a Calicut in India, and eventually ventured on the part of the east side of Asia. In 1500, supposedly, Pedro Álvares Cabral, the founder of Brazil, accidentally drifted off into Brazil, which again is not so true, because the Portuguese already have the total awareness of the existence of the continent of Brazil in 1460s. But because of the power of Spain, while Portuguese have explored the entire west coast of Africa, they already been in Ghana, they already established the town called Lagos today in Nigeria. So, but this is a little bit of a part of the story of these three major Portuguese travelers and navigators. And 20 years later, also financed by Spain, wanting to expand the entire Western India, at that time they think of Americas, and by the travel of Fernand Magalhães, English, most of you know his name is Magellan. And Magellan took the same technique of navigating along the coast of South America, managed to find his pathway and got through into the Pacific Ocean. And where he had landed into today's Las Filipinas, naming after Philip II, the Prince of Spain, eventually the Emperor. And that is where Philippines were discovered. And from another quasi-fofoca gossip, that is the other Chinese Silk Road, starting by the Chinese from the southeast region, the provinces of Fujian, and also the linguistic tongue linking Fujian and Taiwan, the native tongue called Mainnan. And in any given time, the empire of the Philippines have over 50% of the residents non-converted to Catholicism living in outside of the city of the Philippines, Coparion, and where the entire transit with Spain occupying the largest world peace on land and at sea, be that from the port of Veracruz in the Yucatan, transit through Acapulco, and from all the Acapulco transit is the entire silver the Spanish using from their, using a Portuguese word, from their control of the region, what we call the Capitania, is the territorial control in Peru, but the mine of silver is located in present-day Bolivia, the mine of Potosi. This immense discovery of the silver had financed not only the entire Silk Road from China using the interport of Manila and using that transit get into the hands of the Spanish, and the merchandise and goods transferred from the Philippines into Acapulco by way of Havana port or Veracruz, and then onward to Spain. And again, the rumor mill is, why didn't the Spanish using the Pacific route, going through India, Africa, and going back to that direction? Of course not. They do not want their discovery of silver and the quantity of silver, which hit the right time at the right moment at the end of the Chinese Ming Dynasty. The currency was fully adapted into silver. So there is tremendous amount of the production of the silver from Potosi going to the Philippines, through Manila, enter into China for the silver trade. In the meantime, 30% of the silver will travel north, back to Mexico, and back to the Yucatan and onward to pay obligations to the Kingdom of Spain. In this, just a little part of history is to adding on to our collective awareness of the size of the empire of Spain, when you count not just the islands, the Philippine Manila, and then they have also discovered the island they call Isla de los Ladrones, or the island of the thieves, which is Guam. And one more, to give my audience a little broader perspective, look at what Spain had in control of the western part of the US, from California to Arizona to Nevada to Texas and to New Mexico. The word Nevada is very simple, means nieve, means snow. Past participle is Nevada, so snowed. And that's how bits and pieces. And you look at the size of Spain, and that size eventually diminished when Mexico declared independence, along with the other Spanish provinces, Spanish states, from Colombia to Venezuela, so on and so forth, and Peru. And look at the size of Spain until in the 1800s, the Spaniards had covered a huge landmass in the ocean area in the Pacific, plus the free crossing from the Americas back to Spain, which eventually had given the motivations and the banditry on seas called piracy, with Captain Francis Drake, Henry Morgan, when the English pirates got hold of the Spanish galleon. And this particular period, the region of the Spanish and the Philippines, namely, were called the Manila Galleons. So this is one part of history that I want to, for whatever reason, I want to put into the perspective about island, about country, about sizes, about empires. This is part of the Western expansion. And now I'll come to the crux of the matter, why I am going after the pedagogy of conscience and to share with the world. Because all this language in the Western culture, in the greater sphere, let me name the four basic ethnic religious groups. First, Judaism, ended with ISM. Second, Roman Catholicism. Third, Protestantism. And the fourth, which is Islamism. And that all four are under the cultural sphere. The biggest sphere is, we can name it, the Abrahamic cultural clusters, all coming down from the religion of Abraham. And subsequently, be that the conquistadors, the explorers, be that of the empire building by the Iberian Peninsula of Portugal and Spain, giving ways to the accelerated advancement of the Dutch and the English, and the creation of the steam engine, and the improvement of the firearms, these West continue to expand, to have make more land into colonization, and with more of the practice of slavery in use of the manpower for the cultivation of sugarcane, cotton, tobacco. And the English had colonized in the 1700s of all of India. And by the 1800s, by the Opium War, literally Asia was colonized by the British. So in this extended, with the Opium War, many Americans do not know or don't care to know. Now history being reviewed openly. Many Americans were also engaged in the opium trade. However, they call it China trade. It's not something they can feel very proud of. Be that the name of the Delano Roosevelt of the Russell Company, be that the Forbes, or as of late, Astor's in the East Coast, and also many of the Ivy League universities and colleges were all funded by the riches of opium. I want to highlight this because with AI, with the moving forward, we shall be able to look at the payments and the amount of Chinese paid out in silver or in whatsoever currency. But the fact lies that until between the time of 1840s and 1700s, when India were colonized by the British, China and India representing almost 65% of the global wealth. With the Chinese selling of tea, silk, porcelain, China had almost a 40% of the global merchandising in the era. Now, with the quantum algorithm, we will find we'll be articulating more and more of the wealth of both China and India. The only way, one of the few ways to measure the amount of wealth had got into England, be that of the Rothschild family and their intermarriage with the sesame growers in then Bangladesh or colonial England by way of opium. Those numbers will surface, and how those numbers have helped or aided eventually to the various sets of industrial revolution, including the time of the railroad, the electricity, and the petroleum in the American West. The way I am expressing in this manner is that because when you are only educated, guided in this biblical context, in this Abrahamic cultural influence, there were no other language by the Western academia, by the Western scholars, by the vast intellects of the Vatican. They do not have the words about what is the Chinese value. Now here comes the discovery. Confucius, Lao Tzu's Tao, and by way of India was Buddha. None of the three, including the early entry, the Zen sect from India, they were all educators. Their entire emphasis summarized by Wang Yangming in the way I rephrase the word 心学, the learning of the language of the heart, I translated into consciencology. I may and may not have done Wang Yangming a favor, but at least this is now in the open. I'm making the assertion that we Chinese speak of the language in the use of our heart. If we dare to make some dissecting some of the Western psyche, then I will compare with the Chinese heart. Let me put it this way. Cognition is one factor. Emotion is the other. The combined fusion of the cognition and emotion, and in the middle coming out, which starting to be a word by many in the West, is called the affective domain. What I'm saying, the three domains: cognition, emotion, and affection. And very likely, of late, this affective domain can come very close to Wang Yangming's Xingshi, or the study of the consciencological study, or the study of conscience, as the way I have just put forth to represent Wang Yangming to the West, and in hope they can create a better understanding, a bridge of communications. So in so many words, for over 3,300 years, I'm using the registered, recorded, written history ever since 3,300 years ago by the discovery of the oracle bones characters pictograph in the Shang dynasty until today. Much of the Chinese history has been recorded. And so what I'm trying to say is absolutely, it's nothing wrong about ignorance. The West had ignored and not become known of the other system of learning, the other system in the cultivation of the human conscience and the language of the heart. Conscience, I look at total pragmatism. Conscience in Chinese is basically translated to have a kind heart, or you can split the word into kindness and heart. Because by cultivation, kindness in people, you receive must be another complementary dynamic in the way I describe spheres. You have to be good. You cannot be kind and not good. So from all these years of the Chinese and their cultivation of the human conscience is very much making the coincidence that conscience cannot be taught, but yes, can be guided with word, guided with the sayings, guided by exemplary, where Confucius had guided the world, his world, with the emphasis of conscience, of human goodness and kindness. Lao Tzu basically having the equal input, but with more emphasis of us loving and caring about the ambience. He is the first ecological philosopher by my count. And by adding the incoming by way of India of Buddha, is all about human compassion. By the way, this is just the beginning of a new passage of my personal awareness of the human conscience. which dominate the entire cultural sphere of the Chinese. I have not even rethink if the similar concept, idea of conscience with nature and with man could have taken places into all the other tribal regions from Africa to Latin America. But the culture and the cultural sphere of conscience is one of the awareness today that I hope we can bridge, or we can be lessening the existing hostility from the West with the East. And the next book I will continue will be the same book, but I will be incorporating other writers and thinkers with their perspective, with their languages incorporated into new chapters, or they're continuing in the same page. And this is the creation of the open books, which in itself, in the linguistic terms of the present day digital age, in the use of the quantum algorithm, in the use of the AI assist education, it is in itself a blockchain. Nobody can go on to become obscured by the insinuation or by the fabrication of false facts with lies. Because in every narration, every visual presentation, the entire presentation can be downloaded into a written script in seconds. And from that script, with the participants sharing the value of the open books, we can intercept, we can insert great comments using the color ink of complimenting, using the green to like, the blue to enhance, the red to criticize, plus the use of the many highlighters, many color you want. Ignorance is not a crime and it's not a sin. But to use with one's own stubbornness, with the fixated or fixated, very Freudian in a sense, you can become the fixation in this, to make it comedic. I don't care if genitalia, oral, anal, in whatsoever biological zone that's shaped by Sigmund Freud. Any of the intentions to allow a misgiving, when such misgiving can be corrected by the participants into the open book format. And the open book format is not to allow any 1 second, one's ignorance, such in the way I use my words, and the Chinese want to know what that word means, they can be inserted, and there will be, in the use of the ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini, can be immediately correcting or changing the translation so the audience would not lose that part of continuity. I'm not against the old writing of books and text. They were forever rich in whatsoever part of the world, in whatsoever library. But the technology we have today is enable us not to become ever ignorant. And from that word of our ignorance, multiple people can enrich that word into richer text and its applications. And in the language of the people making requests. I am very encouraged by this availability and the technology on hand. And if any one of you wonder what is the monkey doing on the left-hand side, by the way, he's wearing a crown. That crown is the reverse logo or doubling of a company, TikTok. As I have ventured all these years doing things sound to be audacious, daring, traveling to the boonies, be that from the Amazons to the jungles in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, in Cambodia, in Burma, China, to the Altai Mountain region, to the northwesternmost part of China. And many of it, I have this Monkey King journey to the West as the inspirator, is part of my alter ego, from the Freudians, ego, superego, and id. I have added in the superego, that is my Chinese Wild Wild West. No less than Jesse James or Wyatt Earp and all the Western heroes when we were growing up. And I will stop this communication here in the sharing with my audience. Yesterday's presentation was a little bit sluggish in trying to do and juggling some of the presentation and uploading of the images, but we'll improve it. And I will continue to using the YouTube communication format, as we will be trying also other formats. And please feel free to go into www.paulyih.ai and to see 7 other platforms in different fields. I'm extremely excited to making this introduction of my writing of the pedagogy of conscience. And I hope this factor of the conscience awareness and conscience education will bring us all in the future greater peace and harmony. Good evening. Good night.
Oi?
Pronto.
Oh.